gentlemen, welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today I'm doing another reaction video. Today's video is an episode of the Pomp podcast. So if you don't know, the Pomp podcast, it's hosted by Anthony Pompliano. You got to check it out. It's a great podcast, and you got to follow Pomp on Twitter. So obviously, links will be in the description. This episode is number 497, and his guest today is Sahil Bloom. And they're talking about financial education. Sahil is a vice president at a private equity firm and a frequent contributor to CNBC. He's also got degrees in economics and public policy from Stanford. So not bad. So I don't know Sahil, but I'm excited to check out the podcast. So let's get into it.
You became very well known on Twitter for financial education, everything from the one-off tweets to these long threads explaining kind of complex concepts in very simple terms. What is the fascination with financial education? Why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, it goes back to my upbringing. Education was always important to my family. I mentioned my father is a professor. My grandfather in India was a chemist, was a professor. And it always struck me, this idea that talent is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. We talk about that a lot. I've seen it all over Twitter. People talk about it. And to me, education is the pathway to fixing that. Education is the path to evenly distributing opportunity across the world, in the US, but also globally. And it struck me back in this is March, April, May of last year, 2020. COVID hits. The economy is an absolute disaster. People are losing their jobs left and right. But all of a sudden, the market comes roaring back. And there were all these people out there, all my friends, family, teammates. I was kind of their resident finance guy. And so I was getting texts saying, what's going on? How the hell is this happening? Why is the market roaring while the economy is in the tank? And it just struck me that all of these concepts around finance, investing, etc., have been overcomplicated by the kind of incumbents, the insiders, quote unquote, for way too long. To me, it's not that complicated for the most part. And the insiders have intentionally overcomplicated things in order to keep the outsiders out. There's this whole environment around finance of, the insiders wanting to make it seem cloudy and complicated so that you don't feel like you can do it yourself. It just doesn't sit right with me. And so back in May, I started thinking, okay, what's some way that I can, in a small way, start to be a part of a solution around this and start to spread information and make people realize that they can do these things on their own, that they can figure these things out. And so I took to Twitter. I had 500 followers at the time when I wrote my first thread, which was this Mr. Federico thread that everyone still talks about, which I find hilarious. But basically, I was out on a walk and came back home, sat on the floor of my garage, and basically just had this idea of a story I could tell to explain how Fed intervention in the markets is driving up asset prices. And I did it with this fictional character, Mr. Federico, and it was very tongue-in-cheek. But it got picked up by a few big accounts. Chamath retweeted it. Scott Melker, my friend, retweeted it. And all of a sudden it kind of took off and it snowballed a bit from there. But the genesis of it was really, let me try to demystify these concepts, using simple language, no jargon, make it accessible, make it digestible, give people the Toyota, not the Ferrari, for lack of a better way to say it.
Well, guys, I totally agree with what Sahil is saying here, and it sounds like I have a lot in common with him. Basically, I'm a huge believer that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So I definitely agree with him. I think every single person on the planet is extremely talented. It just seems like they aren't because of the environment that they're in. And education should be the great equalizer, except that our modern education system basically values one type of person and one type of intelligence. And so anyone who doesn't fit that cookie cutter mold is led to believe that they're not talented and not intelligent. And that to me is absolutely terrible. So that's why I have spent so much of my time in education. And for those of you who don't know, I have a degree in finance. I have an MBA in finance. But I've spent the majority of my career in education as a teacher, a tutor, a professor, and a principal, a high school principal, believe it or not, for a small startup high school. And so, yes, I believe that education needs to change dramatically. And it's not just our K to 12 education system, it's also college, and it's also the inclusion of financial education somewhere, everywhere. I mean, just anything at all. And what he says that, so many adults feel that they can't do their own financial planning, they can't, make their own investments or manage their own money. I totally agree with him that a lot of people feel that way because the people in the industry who control the money try to make it sound way more complicated than it is. And when you peel back the layers, you realize it's actually very, very simple. So I totally agree with him. And, it sounds so far like I'm on the same mission as him, which is to demystify all this stuff and present it in simple ways for people.
And so when you think through, let's say that we could give financial education to everyone. It was free, it was accessible, they paid attention, they learned the lessons. What's the impact on the market and maybe on their personal wealth once we actually get people educated? Because I think a lot of folks hear, financial education, they generally think like, yeah, that would be cool if we could do that. But they don't understand how impactful it could be.
Yeah. Well, when I think about my own life, or anyone's life for that matter, like what is the fundamental goal that most people have in life? It's to take care of their family and their friends, to live a happy life and to be able to support those that they love. And wealth creation, building wealth, generating income, knowing what to do with it is foundational to that. I don't know how you can have that end without understanding, the pathway to it. And that's through financial education, financial literacy. I am baffled that in high school or middle school, I learned about mitochondria. I learned about the Ming Dynasty. I learned about isosceles triangles and the Pythagorean theorem, but I didn't learn about taxes. I didn't learn about investing. I didn't know what the S&P 500 was. I didn't learn about budgeting. I mean, it's just insane that we have this education system in the richest country in the world where we're not educating people on how to take care of themselves for the future, how to build wealth and achieve the goals that they have for themselves financially.
100% I agree with him. Perfect. I totally agree. I mean, like, we don't learn any of those things he said. We don't learn what money is, where it comes from. Why does the dollar have value? What is the role of gold in the monetary system, in the past or present? I mean, there are so many additional things that we could talk about that are very, very easy to discuss and are extremely, extremely important. And basically, to sort of, carry it a little bit farther and sort of answer Pomp's question, from my opinion, is like, what would happen if people knew all these things? People wouldn't struggle financially. That's sort of the answer. Like, people wouldn't worry so much about money. There'd be hardly anyone working two jobs ever. I mean, just the emotions that people would feel, they would just be so much more confident, calm. They'd be less stressed. And obviously they would probably have more wealth. I mean, everybody. Like, one of the huge limiting beliefs is that, money itself is a zero-sum game, which means that if I have a dollar, you can't have the same dollar. And that's true, you can't have the same dollar, but we can be busy creating wealth for each other so many times that I'm constantly paying you for what you created, and then you pay it back to me for what I created, and we go back and forth creating value for each other and exchanging value, and that dollar can go back and forth an unlimited number of times, and then we have a bunch of amazing products and services, and we essentially live like kings, even with a fixed supply of money. So that's a huge limiting belief that could have disappeared when people were in middle school, but instead we carry it, some of us, for our entire lives.
What do you think the best way is to teach people this? Is it sit them in a classroom and have them learn that way? Is it give everybody $100 and say, go YOLO long and GameStop options? Like, how do we just get across the information in a way that people actually internalize it and truly understand and learn the lessons?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think all of traditional education needs to change and adapt. We're in this tech-enabled world now. If COVID has had one positive impact, it's that technology has had a 10, 15, 20-year accelerating event. And so people are realizing that and realizing the power that technology can hold in improving education. But for me, I think the old, sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day as a kid, be forced to wake up super early so you're not sleeping enough, go read a textbook, and then come in and do a problem set. That model is dead. It's dying and it's going to be dead. And we need to figure out broadly, whether it's financial education or any subject, how we're going to educate kids so that the information sticks. important information, and then make sure it sticks. And I think it's changing. I think gamifying information is a great way to do it. I mean, we joke about like YOLO and GameStop options, but the idea of like creating some form of game where people can learn about these topics in an engaging manner is very real. And so to me, it comes down to delivering it in a more interesting way. I think I've gotten and kind of struck that chord a little bit with what I've been doing with the threads, but it's just scratching the surface on what some amazing companies are going to come out and do around these things in the future.
A little bit I agree with him, but not entirely. So I don't think that there's one best way to do it. I don't think it's sit them down in a classroom and blah, blah, blah. I mean, whatever comes next. I don't think so. And the reason for that is you can't force someone to learn something. You can't force it. Learning is individual and spontaneous, and I would argue unpredictable. So if you sit someone down in a classroom and force them to listen to the best podcast on finance, or force them to watch a video on finance or whatever, they might learn that authority is controlling. And they might not learn anything about finance, right? So you can't really necessarily predict what somebody is going to learn. I mean, you could try, you can hope, but I don't think you can predict what someone is going to learn. So anyways, what do I think is the best way? I think the best way to educate our children, so to speak, is give them choices. Give them choices. Some kids are going to want to wake up in the morning and go to school. Some kids are going to want to sleep in and not go to school ever. Some kids are going to want to do this. Some kids are going to want to do that. Some are going to want to listen to podcasts. Others are going to watch videos. Some are going to want to read books. Some are going to want to play the stock market. Some are going to want to play games about finance. Some are going to want to do something else. I think you got to give them choices. And the burden is on the teachers, in whatever role they take, to be flexible enough to accommodate the needs of the students. And for people who say, well, some kids are going to want to sleep in and do nothing all day. Yeah, they might do that for a few days, some maybe even a few weeks, but eventually they're going to want to do something. Like, it is a living being's nature to learn. Like anybody, a squirrel. Like, you just learn. So kids will want to learn. They will get passionate about something. And I think part of the reason that we see kids like rebel and be lazy now is because they're forced to be in a system that is so bad for them that they resist. But if you didn't make them go, eventually they would be eager about something and then pursue that thing, and whatever they pursue, they would learn it really well.
Yeah, and so do you think that the for-profit model is better because it aligns incentives and really kind of drives people to be successful and get the word out there? Is it a nonprofit? Do they coexist? Like, how do you think about the kind of model that works best?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a small government guy for the most part, so my bias bleeds into this. I personally believe in capitalism. I believe that the private markets handle innovation much better than the public markets, and I think, frankly, that has been proven out throughout the history of our world and of our country. And so for me, it comes down to the private markets. I think we need to allow innovation to happen. There are a lot of investment funds now that are investing heavily in ed tech. I think it's phenomenal. I think there are going to be some really differentiated, interesting models around education that are coming out. I mean, income sharing stuff, Lambda School, the cohort-based courses stuff that our friends Gagan and Wes are building. Like, there's just some amazing stuff that's coming, but we need to make sure we're fostering it. We need to make sure that we're getting people to see it. There needs to be that access level so that we can start building, innovating, and iterating on it so that we can get better and better over time.
Okay, so I got to admit, I don't know much about ed tech, right? I don't follow any of these funds or their products or anything like that. One thing that I'll say is, let me start with a quote from Zig Ziglar. If you're unwilling to learn, no one can help you. If you're determined to learn, no one can stop you. I love that quote. It is so powerful. It is so true. And I think that, the key to education, if you will, is not necessarily better technology. It's not necessarily every kid gets an iPad. It's not necessarily anything, right? It's, first of all, don't force things onto a kid's plate. That's number one. Number two, let a kid, or an adult for that matter, figure out what he or she is interested in, right? When they're determined to learn about whatever. It doesn't matter if it's on the curriculum, right? Whatever you're determined to learn about, then go learn about it. And no one can stop you. Like, if you really want answers to questions, you're going to find them. And it doesn't matter if you're Google searching or you're listening to podcasts or you go to the library and take out some books or whatever. Like, you will find a way to do it, right? And part of the role of teachers is to, like, just give you access to all these things and tell you, like, hey, by the way, there's such a thing called the internet. Here's a thing called the library. Have at it. So, like, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. In fact, I'm positive there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And in terms of Pomp's question about the private and public marketplaces and not-for-profits, I think you got to deregulate the education industry. You got to get the federal government out of it because there is almost nothing that every single person needs. Almost nothing. I mean, if you grow up in an English-speaking country like the United States, okay, you got to speak English. That's about it. Like, that's about it that everyone needs. Maybe you don't need to know how to solve for, x squared equals 16. Maybe you don't need to know that. Plenty of people don't need to know that. And if they do need to know it, maybe they figure it out when they're 25 or 41 or however many years old. It doesn't matter. But, like, to say everyone needs to know that by the time they're, 9 years old or whatever is just absolutely crazy. So I think all the money we spend on schools at a federal level is a really, really misuse of that, really, really bad use. Like, it is total, like, misappropriation of those resources. So I'm not recommending that all of a sudden we just, like, cancel it immediately and everyone's on their own. No, you got to have some kind of transition plan, which is not something I'm going to talk about right now. But ultimately, that's the point you want to get to. And you let, not-for-profits, operate as much as they want. You let private schools operate as much as they want. Sure, for-profit schools, I think if someone's providing a ton of value and people are choosing to pay money, like I pay money to Audible every month because it is an amazing service. Like, that's education for me. So it's amazing. I'm happy to pay them money. If someone were to make the argument that Audible should be free because it's education, I mean, that's crazy to me. No. So, yeah, it's totally fine to have profit in education. That's a very good thing.
For sure. I'm actually an investor in a company that is not yet publicly announced themselves, I don't think. But basically what they've done is they've created a game and they're teaching young kids. It's not so much personal finance or financial education, but it's more problem solving skills and teamwork and kind of things that are just like life skills that will apply to every industry. And it's fascinating to watch how impactful it is when it's wrapped as a game versus when it is delivered in the classroom.
Totally. And I'm super bullish on, the idea of, like, the metaverse and the future of all of these things and how education can be conducted in a totally virtual environment in the future, right? Like, Ready Player One, people have seen the movie or read the book, but that future is not that far off. I mean, Fortnite is, like, starting to get at some of these things, but imagine a world where you can, in a virtual environment, learn new information, take classes, go anywhere in the world. You can study history by actually going to that place in a virtual world. Like, it's just incredible to think about the potential of these technologies if we continue to invest in them and support them, and if the government doesn't get in the way of allowing these innovations to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think gamifying a lot of things is really, really exciting and really, really valuable. The only thing I'll add is that you just shouldn't force anyone to do it, right? You shouldn't force anyone to play a game or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting future, and I'm excited for it.
Absolutely. I know you had a lot of thoughts about accreditation. So do I. Maybe talk through just like the accreditation laws, why maybe it actually makes sense to have some sort of barrier to investing, but also what some of the detrimental impacts of the specific laws that we have today.
Yeah, you and I have interacted on this topic on Twitter a bit in the past. I mean, I think our accreditation laws are just archaic. I understand the genesis of them. In principle, the idea of requiring certain disclosures and understanding of what you're investing in prior to the investment makes sense. I get that. But the way it's applied is so absurd, almost asinine in America right now. I mean, the fact that I can I can't invest in my buddy's startup. He's starting some company, but I can invest in a XXX levered mortgage ETN on Robinhood, or I can go, like an 18-year-old can go lever up and buy a bunch of call options on Robinhood, and just that does not make any sense, right? Like, it's hard to sit down and say that that's logical. And so that's what I really take issue with, is like, if you have a system, I get it, but it needs to make sense broadly. It can't just, be focused in a certain area where you can't really figure out what the rhyme or reason is behind it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really follow too much of the accreditation laws. I mean, I think you have to have $250,000 net worth. I forget the exact rules. But I do recognize that there are major inconsistencies, and that there are, a lot of really dangerous options available to retail investors, and those options aren't explained. I mean, they're extremely high risk. A lot of brokerage accounts and other accounts default to giving the user margin, and I think the average person has no idea what margin is or how dangerous it is. And so, there's definitely some inconsistencies, and I agree. I understand like the genesis of the laws or the rationale for having some of them. But the problem you get is that the regulations will always be trying to play catch up with new innovations, like new types of investments, new like schemes and scenarios and so forth. And it just serves to take away opportunities from people. That's the problem I have, is that all these laws take away people's freedoms under the rationale that we're helping people. And I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time with that coming from regulatory bodies. I have a hard time with that coming from, legislative entities and the federal government, for example. I have a hard time with that because there's so much evidence throughout history that the federal government in the United States and in many other countries don't have their citizens' best interests at heart. They don't. They say they do, obviously, but they don't. There's just so much evidence. I mean, it's overwhelming that it seems like a ridiculous claim to make. So, what do I think the solution is? I think similar to education, if you deregulate, and you can't do it all at once, right? There has to be some kind of transition strategy. And again, I haven't thought that through, so I don't know what that would be. But in my mind, the objective would be you deregulate and you let people do what they want, and there will be companies, private companies, that spring up that specialize in helping people understand different investments. So everything would be legal. You can invest in anything, your friend's startup, whatever. You can invest in anything. But if you don't understand it or you want help, there would be dedicated companies that you would pay. Here's $1,000, or here's 2% or 10% or whatever the fees are, and they would help explain it to you, help you understand the risks involved. And if they're trustworthy, they're trustworthy. And if they're not, they're not. Right? There will be scams. Right? There will be entities like that take advantage of people, but those ones will go out of business very quickly. And you'll over time have companies that survive because they're honest and reputable, and they have fair prices and so forth. And, a lot of people will gravitate to the ones that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years and not the ones that were just started yesterday. So, I think, and it is also important to mention that those companies themselves should also be not regulated. They should be able to say whatever they want. They shouldn't have to say like, oh, this isn't financial advice. Oh, disclosure. They should be able to say whatever they want. In a perfect world, right? This is how I envision it. Will we ever get there? I doubt it, but that's my thought.
What do you think about it? I'm curious.
I just think it violates the American dream. Like, the whole promise of the American dream is that no matter where you come from, what language you speak, the color of your skin, your race, your religion, your wealth status, your education level, anything, you can come to this country and you can make a living for yourself, and you can pursue a life of, kind of happiness and economic prosperity.
Yeah,
we should probably do everything we possibly can to allow that to happen, and putting a kind of gate in front of some of the best investments by saying, hey, if you're not wealthy, you're not smart enough to underwrite this, seems like maybe there's a better way. Which, my question back to you is like, what is the better way? If you're given full carte blanche powers, what do you do to fix it?
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. The whole idea of like using wealth as a proxy for intelligence is absurd. And we've seen over the last few months, right? Like the system has changed, and what wealth cannot be used as a proxy for intelligence, point blank, period. How do you fix it? I personally think you need to make the barriers to everything much lower. I'm personally just pro, allowing markets to work and the democratization of all of this stuff. I think like Matt Levine, who's one of my favorite writers on the internet, he writes money stuff for Bloomberg. It's an amazing newsletter if you're not subscribed. He talks about the I am stupid letter, which it's very tongue in cheek, but it's a funny idea where you basically have to click and check a box that says, I understand this is a risky investment and I'm likely to lose all of my money on it. And you acknowledge it, you read it, you acknowledge it, and then you're able to make the investment. And I actually think, all jokes aside, it's an interesting way of getting at it, where you're forcing the person to acknowledge that it's a risky asset class. And that should apply to a XXX levered mortgage ETN or a GameStop call option the same way it should to my friend who's starting a restaurant startup or whatever it might be. But if you force people to have that moment of kind of recognition of the risky nature of the investment, you have to allow people to, take care of themselves, right? It's like survival of the fittest in some sense, where I don't think the government's role is to be out there trying to protect people in a weird, non-standardized way by placing accreditation in front of certain asset classes and not in front of others.
Yeah, the problem you have when the government tries to take care of everyone is that everyone's different, right? So like if I lose $100 in an investment and you lose $100, that's not the same consequence for both of us, right? Like the bad aspect of that is how we react to it, how we react to losing $100. Like losing $100 isn't necessarily a bad thing. You could be thankful for it. It could be a blessing. You could be like, oh, it's great. That $100 was an inconvenience for me to have. I know that's a weird perspective, but you could have it. For sure you could. It's like, if I have an old car right now and it's at the mechanic, it might not be able to be fixed. So like, yeah, that's a loss, and the government could have some law about, I don't know, whatever, insurance or something. Like I have to have it. Obviously I do, but I mean, they could have a different kind of law. But like maybe the best thing for me is for that car to be, totaled or not fixable. Maybe that's the best thing for me, to lose that car. I'm open to that possibility. So yeah, maybe that's the best thing. I had a friend his house burned down. Yeah, he had fire insurance, but maybe the best thing for him was for that house to burn down for whatever reason. I don't know. Like, of course we would be quick to say, "Oh no, that's terrible." Yeah, of course that was my reaction too. Sorry, dude. I'm like so sorry to hear that. But like maybe there's something good that comes out of it. And the problem with trying to regulate every single thing is you can't just say that a particular outcome is strictly bad and equally bad for every single person. It's just not. It's just not. Not to mention the fact that, like I said earlier, is people will innovate and create new investment types and so forth, and the innovation happens faster than the legislation. The innovation happens faster than the regulation. So it's sort of a losing battle trying to regulate everything. And, I guess in a perfect world, we would just have basic principles, like if you knowingly take advantage of someone, that's a crime punishable by X, whatever it is. And then that's the standard. And then everyone does their own thing. And that would be chaotic at first. For sure, that would be chaotic at first. But then over time, you'd get some really savvy people. Everyone would be savvy. And parents would raise very savvy children. Don't risk everything, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Be careful who you trust. All these like basic things that make sense. It seems like a lot of kids don't have that lesson today.